Grand Hall of Ethelgard was a masterpiece of light and arrogance. Crystalline spires stretched toward the violet sky, catching the fading radiance of the Lissari sun and refracting it into shifting patterns of gold and azure across the polished floors. This was the heart of the Lissari Empire, a civilization that had mastered the photon and the wave, turning light into architecture, into medicine, into art. But as Princess Sevrana stood before the High Council, her hands trembling beneath her ceremonial robes, she saw only a tomb. She was the last daughter of a bloodline that claimed to hear the stars sing. But today, the stars were screaming. "The Vorm are not a myth," Sevrana said, her voice ringing clear through the acoustic perfection of the chamber. She refused to let the tremor in her hands reach her throat. 3 outpost systems in the outer rim have gone dark in the last 10 days. Not conquered, not blockaded, gone. The stars themselves have been snuffed out. Counselors. The void is eating our borders. High Counselor Varen leaned back in his gravity-suspended chair, his face a mask of bored indulgence. He adjusted the shimmer silk of his sleeve, a gesture so casual it made Sevrana want to scream. "Outposts go dark for many reasons, Princess," Varen said, his voice smooth as oil. "Solar flares, communication array failures, pirate raids. To leap from technical glitches to the resurrection of a nursery rhyme monster is, frankly, beneath a woman of your standing." "A nursery rhyme?" Sevrana stepped forward. The light weave of her dress flared with her rising emotion, the bioluminescent threads turning a sharp, warning crimson. "I have felt the silence. I have touched the minds of the navigators who tried to jump into those systems. They found nothing but cold, hungry static. The Vorm are real. They are interdimensional. They are voracious. And they are coming for Ethelgard." A low ripple of laughter moved through the room. It was not the laughter of amusement, but of dismissal. To her right, Kalen, her half-brother, stood with his arms crossed. He was beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful, sharp, gleaming, and cold. He wanted the throne, and he knew that hysteria was the easiest way to disqualify a rival. "Sevrana," Kalen said, his tone dripping with faux sympathy. "You have been under a great deal of strain since Father passed. Perhaps the burden of your grief is manifesting as paranoia. We have the Light Guard fleet. We have the photon walls. We are the Lissari. We do not fear the dark." "You should," she snapped, turning to face him. "Because the dark does not care about your fleets. It does not care about your walls." "Enough," Varen commanded. "The Council has heard your concerns. Princess, we will send a maintenance crew to the Outer Rim to investigate the communication relays. Until then, I suggest you return to your quarters and rest. The gala for the solstice is in 2 days. You look tired." Tired. The word hung in the air like a sentence. They were dismissing the apocalypse because it was inconvenient to their politics. Sevrana looked at the faces of the Council, 12 of the wisest minds in the galaxy, all blinded by their own brilliance. She bowed her head, not in submission but to hide the terrifying clarity in her eyes. "As you wish, Counselor," she whispered. She turned and walked out of the Hall of Light. She did not go to her quarters. The decision had been made before she even entered the chamber. If the Lissari would not save themselves, she would have to do it for them. The lower levels of the capital city were a stark contrast to the crystalline spires above. Here, the shadows were long, and the air smelled of ozone and decay. Sevrana moved through the narrow alleys, her identity concealed beneath a heavy cloak of dull gray wool. She had stripped away her royal jewels, leaving only the hidden currency cylinder strapped to her thigh and the small plasma dagger in her boot. She found the door she was looking for in a cul-de-sac that smelled of damp earth. It was an old rebel safe house, a remnant of a war that had ended 50 years ago. Inside, the air was thick with incense smoke. An old woman sat on a cushion in the center of the room. Her eyes were milky white, blind to the physical world. Yet she turned her head unerringly as Sevrana entered. "The Princess of Light walks in shadow," the old woman rasped. Her name was Oila, a seer the High Council had long ago branded a heretic. "They did not listen," Sevrana said, dropping her hood. Her silver hair spilled out, glowing faintly in the dim room. "They think I am mad." "They are the mad ones," Oila said. She gestured with a withered hand. "Sit, child. The time is short. The Vorm scent is already on the wind." Sevrana sat. "You sent the message. You said there was a way. A weapon." "Not a weapon," Oila corrected. "A being. Jaltor." The name sent a shiver down Sevrana's spine. It was a name from the forbidden texts, a god of the spaces between galaxies, a creature of old physics and forgotten laws. Jaltor is a myth, a bedtime story to frighten children. "He is as real as the Vorm," Oila said, leaning forward. The incense smoke seemed to coil around her fingers. "He resides in the Orus Veil, a nebula where ships do not go. He holds the power to seal the breach the Vorm are using. But he is not a benevolent god. Sevrana. He is a merchant of causality. He grants miracles, but he demands a price." "I have credits," Sevrana said quickly. "I have royal access codes. I can offer him territory." Oila laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "He does not want your money or your maps, little princess. He deals in the currency of the soul, essence, memory, self. Are you prepared to pay that?" Sevrana hesitated. She thought of the council, laughing in their tower of light. She thought of the families in the lower city, oblivious to the encroaching dark. "If it saves my people," Sevrana said, her voice steady, "I will pay anything." "Then go," Oila said. "Oh, but you must hurry, and Kalen knows you are gone. His shadows are already hunting you." As if summoned by her words, the heavy door behind Sevrana exploded inward. Shards of wood and metal sprayed the room. Two figures in sleek black combat armor stepped through the dust, their faces obscured by polarized helmets. They held silence pistols, weapons designed to kill without a sound. "Run!" Oila screamed, throwing a handful of powder into the air. It ignited in a blinding flash of magnesium. Sevrana did not waste the distraction. She bolted for the rear exit, scrambling through a window that led to the waste chutes. Behind her, she heard the soft thwip of a silencer and the thud of a body hitting the floor. Grief tore at her throat, but she swallowed it. She slid down the waste chute, landing in a heap of refuse 3 levels down. She was bruised, she smelled of garbage, and she was now a traitor to the crown. She began to run. Koro 7 was a blister on the side of the galaxy. It was a black market outpost floating in the debris field of a dead moon, a haven for smugglers, mercenaries, and anyone else who wanted to disappear. The air scrubbers were 50 years past their warranty, leaving the station with a permanent haze of recycled smoke and engine grease. Sevrana moved through the crowds, her cloak pulled tight. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of different languages, mechanical whirring, and the thumping bass of aggressive music. She kept her head down, navigating toward the docking ring. She needed a pilot, not a Lysari pilot. They were too loyal to the throne. She needed someone desperate, someone crazy. She found the place Oila had whispered about before the assassins came. The Iron Lung. It was a dive bar built into the hollowed-out casing of an old thruster engine. The interior was dark, lit only by flickering neon strips. Sevrana scanned the room. Her empathy sense, usually a refined instrument, was overwhelmed by the jagged emotions of the patrons: greed, lust, anger, fear. It hit her like a physical wave, making her nauseous. She pushed through it, focusing on a booth in the back corner. A human male sat there, boots up on the table, spinning a magnetic credit chip between his fingers. He wore a flight jacket that had seen better decades, the leather scuffed and stained. His face was a map of hard living. A jagged scar ran from his jaw to his ear, and his eyes, the color of storm clouds, held a cynical boredom that suggested he had seen everything the galaxy had to offer and found it lacking. Commander Rhys Calder. Sevrana approached the table. She smelled of refuse from the chute, but she stood with the posture of a queen. "I am told," she said, her voice low, "that you are the best pilot in this sector who does not ask questions." Rhys didn't look up. He kept spinning the chip. "You were told wrong. I ask plenty of questions, usually about money." "I have money," she said. "Good for you." He finally looked at her. His gaze swept over her cloak, lingering on the way she held herself. "But I don't fly charter for runaways. Go find a transport shuttle, sweetheart. You look like you're late for a costume party." "I need to go to the Oris Vale," she said. The chip stopped spinning. Rhys caught it in his palm and sat up slowly. The boredom vanished, replaced by a sharp, dangerous focus. "Nobody goes to the Oris Vale," he said. "The navigation charts are blank. It is a graveyard." "I have the coordinates," she lied, "and I can pay you triple your standard rate." "Triple?" Rhys raised an eyebrow. "You must be in a lot of trouble." He took a sip of the amber liquid in his glass. "Let me guess. Daddy is angry? Arranged marriage you don't like? Or did you steal something?" "I am hiring you for a service, Commander, not a conversation," Sevrana said, her patience fraying. "Will you take the job, or should I find someone with more courage and less mouth?" Rhys chuckled, a dry sound. "Courage isn't the problem. It's the life expectancy." He stood up, and she realized he was taller than she expected. He loomed over her, smelling of cheap whiskey and gun oil. "Show me the credits." Sevrana reached into her cloak and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She tipped it onto the table. 3 perfectly cut Lissari sunstones rolled out, glowing with an inner fire that illuminated the dark corner of the bar. Rhys stared at them. These were worth more than his ship. They were worth more than this entire station. He looked back at her, his eyes narrowing. "You're Lissari," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "High caste, by the look of those rocks. And you're on Coro 7. He shook his head. "Lady, you are walking catastrophe." "Are you afraid?" she challenged me. "Terrified," he said, scooping up the stones. "But the ship needs a new hyperdrive coil, and I'm thirsty." He grabbed his jacket. "Come on. If we're going to the Oris Vale, I need to sober up. And you need to get off this station before whoever you stole these from comes looking." "I did not steal them," she said stiffly, following him as he pushed through the crowd. "Right," Rhys drawled. "And I'm the Emperor of the Terran Federation." The Talon was an ugly ship. It sat in Hangar Bay 4 like a bruised fist, its hull patchwork of mismatched metal plates and blast scarring. It was a heavy freighter, modified for speed and combat, but it looked like it was held together by duct tape and prayers. "It is rustic," Sevrana said, staring at the vessel. "She's got it where it counts," Rhys said, keying the ramp code. "Don't judge her paint job until you see her fly." They boarded quickly. The interior was cramped, the corridors lined with exposed piping and bundles of wire. It was cold, and the air tasted of recycled oxygen that hadn't been scrubbed recently enough. "Strap in," Reese said, pointing to the co-pilot seat in the cockpit. "We're leaving without clearance. Port Authority gets cranky about that." Savrana sat in the worn leather seat. The console in front of her was a nightmare of analog switches and holographic displays. She watched Reese work, his hands moving with practiced, fluid grace over the controls. For all his cynicism, he moved like a musician when he was in the pilot's chair. "Firing main thrusters," he muttered. The ship shuddered violently. A roar filled the cabin, vibrating in Savrana's teeth. The Talon lurched upward, blasting out of the hangar bay just as the station's blast doors began to close. "Hold on," Reese shouted. He banked the ship hard to the left, dodging a fuel tanker, and punched the sublight engines. The stars blurred into streaks of white. They were away. Savrana let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She watched Coro 7 shrink into a speck of light behind them. She was safe. For now. "So," Reese said, flipping a switch to engage the autopilot. He swiveled his chair to face her. "Oris Vale, that's deep space, unstable space. What is a Lissari princess doing running toward a nebula that eats ships?" Savrana stiffened. "I never said I was a princess." "You didn't have to," Reese said, gesturing to her. "The posture, arrogance, the fact that you pay with sunstones, and the news feeds are lighting up. Princess Savrana missing. Reward for information." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're a walking bounty, Your Highness. I could turn this ship around and retire on a private moon." Savrana met his gaze. Her eyes, a piercing violet, glowed faintly. "You could, but you won't. Why not?" "Because you are a smuggler," she said. "You value freedom. If you turn me in, you hand me over to a cage. I do not think you are a man who likes cages." Reese stared at her for a long moment. Then he snorted and turned back to the console. "Don't pretend you know me, princess. I'm doing this for the rocks. You get your ride, I get paid. Don't make it complicated." 2 days into the journey, the silence of deep space began to weigh on them. The Talon was a small world. They circled each other like planets in conflicting orbits. Reese was abrasive, messy, and loud. Savrana was precise, quiet, and deeply unsettled by the grime of the ship. They were in the mess hall, a tiny nook with a table and a food synthesizer that only produced gray sludge. Savrana was examining a small object she had brought with her, a shard of a memory crystal from her mother's collection. It was a cracked, dead stone. "What is that?" Reese asked. He was eating the gray sludge with a grim determination. "A memory," Savrana said softly. "My mother gave it to me before she died. It is supposed to hold the history of our line, but it is broken." "Everything breaks eventually," Reese said. "Not everything." Savrana closed her eyes. She reached into the well of energy that all Lissari possessed but rarely used. The inner light. It was the source of their technology, their art, their very life. She poured a fraction of her soul into the crystal. The reaction was instantaneous. The mess hall exploded with light. It wasn't harsh, like a floodlight, but liquid and iridescent. It swirled around Savrana, lifting her hair, turning her skin translucent. For a heartbeat, she wasn't a woman of flesh and bone. She was a silhouette of pure, blinding energy. The veins in her hands shone like constellations. The crystal hummed, projecting a fractured hologram of a laughing woman, her mother. Reese dropped his spoon. He pushed his chair back, his hand instinctively going to the blaster at his hip, not out of aggression, but out of sheer primal shock. "What the hell are you?" he breathed. Savrana gasped and let go of the crystal. The light collapsed instantly. leaving the room dim and gray again. She slumped forward, exhausted. "I am Lissari," she whispered. "We are children of the photon, and we do not just use light, Commander, and we are light." Reese slowly took his hand off his gun. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. The mockery was gone from his face, replaced by a wary awe. "I've seen Lissari before," he said quietly. "Diplomats, traitors. They didn't do that. They have forgotten who they are," Sevrana said sadly. "We became civilized. We built walls to hide our nature. But the old blood, it remembers." Reese didn't say anything for a long time. He stood up and walked over to the coffee maker, pouring a cup with hands that were not quite steady. "You're dangerous," he said, his back to her. "Does that frighten you?" He turned around, holding the steaming cup. His eyes were dark. "Yeah, it does." That night, the ship felt different. The hostility had burned away in the flash of light, leaving something warmer, more fragile in its place. They sat in the cockpit, watching the stars streak by. The Orus Veil was visible now on the long-range scanners, a bruise of purple and black gas against the velvet void. "My people believe the Veil is cursed," Sevrana said. She was curled up in the co-pilot seat, looking small without her ceremonial robes. "It's just gas and gravity," Reese said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "Hard to navigate, but not magic." "You do not believe in magic?" "I believe in thruster ratios and shield harmonics," Reese said. "Magic gets you killed. And yet, you are flying into a cursed nebula for a woman you just met." Reese glanced at her. The cockpit lights cast shadows across his scars, softening the hard lines of his face. "Like I said, the money is good. Is that the only reason?" He didn't answer. He adjusted a dial that didn't need adjusting. "I have never been this far from home," Sevrana admitted, her voice barely audible over the hum of the drive. "I have never been alone." "You're not alone," Reese said. It was an automatic response, but as soon as he said it, the air in the cockpit shifted. Sevrana looked at him. The distance between their chairs seemed to shrink. She leaned forward slightly, the starlight catching the curve of her cheekbone. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid that even if we find Jaltor, I will never return." "Not really." Reese stopped fiddling with the controls. He turned his chair to face her fully. The cockpit was silent save for the rhythmic thrum of the engine. He looked at her lips, then up to her violet eyes. "You'll return," he said, his voice rough. "I don't lose passengers. You might lose this one." She leaned closer. He could smell her scent like rain on hot stone, electric and clean. It would be so easy to close the gap, so easy to forget the mission, the Vorm, the money. Reese stayed frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to touch that skin that hid galaxies beneath it, but he didn't. He just watched her, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw. "Get some sleep, Princess," he said softly. "We hit the nebula in 4 hours." Sevrana lingered for a second longer, searching his face for something. Then she nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "Good night, Reese." She left the cockpit. Reese stayed, staring out at the blackness, his hands gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. He must have dozed off, because the proximity alarm screamed like a dying animal. Reese jolted awake, his hands flying to the controls. The cockpit was bathed in flashing red light. "Hull breach imminent," the ship's computer shrieked. "Shields at 40%. Sevrana ran into the cockpit, stumbling as the ship rocked violently. "What is happening?" "Ambush!" Reese yelled, his fingers dancing over the tactical display. We're being painted. Multiple targets. Drones. He threw the Talon into a corkscrew spin. Outside the viewport, space was alive with laser fire. A swarm of jagged black machines, Vorm drones, were swarming them like angry hornets. They moved with impossible synchronization, silent and deadly. They found us, Savrana gasped, gripping the back of Reese's chair. How did they find us? Doesn't matter. Reese gritted his teeth. A blast rocked the ship, sending sparks showering from the overhead console. Shields are failing. We can't fight this many. I have to jump. We are too close to the nebula, Savrana cried. A jump without calculations could kill us. Staying here will kill us. Reese slammed the throttle forward. Hang on. He primed the hyperdrive. The engine whined, a high-pitched scream of protesting metal. Suddenly a beam of dark, violet energy lashed out from the lead drone. It didn't hit the ship. It hit Savrana. It passed through the hull as if it wasn't there, striking her directly in the chest. Savrana screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain, but of invasion. She fell to her knees, clutching her right arm. Savrana! Reese shouted, reaching for her, but he couldn't let go of the yoke. Jump! She screamed, her eyes rolling back in her head. Reese, jump now! Reese punched the engagement button. The stars elongated into lines of infinite white. The G-force slammed them back into their seats. The Talon tore a hole in reality, vanishing from normal space just as the Vorm drones converged on their position. Silence returned to the cockpit, heavy and ringing. Reese unbuckled and scrambled out of his seat. He fell to his knees beside Savrana. She was breathing hard, sweat slicking her forehead. Are you hit? He demanded, scanning her for blood. Talk to me. My arm, she gasped. Look at my arm. Reese ripped the sleeve of her tunic. He drew a sharp breath. There was no blood, but the skin of her forearm was burning, etched into her flesh, glowing with a pulsating gold light, was a complex geometric pattern. It shifted and moved, lines rearranging themselves like living ink. What is it? Reese whispered, horrified. Savrana stared at the glowing marks, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. The pain was fading, replaced by a cold, thrumming connection to something vast and ancient. It is not a wound, she whispered, trembling. It is a map. She looked up at Reese, her face pale. The Vorm didn't shoot to kill, she said. They marked me. They know where we are going, Reese, and they just gave us the key. The ship shuddered as it hurtled through the blind jump, carrying them into the unknown, with the burning map on her skin lighting up the dark cockpit. The jump out of hyperspace was not a smooth transition. It felt like being thrown through a pane of glass. The Talon shuddered violently, metal groaning under the stress of the emergency deceleration. Alarms screamed in the cockpit, a cacophony of warnings that Reese Calder silenced with a frantic sweep of his hand across the console. He fought the yoke, wrestling the ship into stability as the artificial gravity compensators whined and finally caught up with reality. Savrana gasped, gripping the armrests of her chair until her knuckles turned white. The nausea of the jump hit her, but she swallowed it down, her eyes fixed on the viewport. The stars had stopped streaking. They hung suspended in the black velvet of space, cold and indifferent. But directly ahead, filling the view with a bruised, ochre-looming presence, was a planet. It was not the vibrant blue and green of a living world, nor the stark white of an ice moon. It was a dead thing. The surface was a swirl of dust storms and gray rock, scarred by craters that looked like open wounds. Naldur, Savrana whispered. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. Reese checked the readouts, his hands moving with the frantic precision of a man who expected to be dead 10 seconds ago. The atmosphere is thin but breathable, he said, his voice raspy. Gravity is .9 standard, no energy signatures, no satellites, no life signs. He looked over at her, his gray eyes searching her face. We made it. The random jump vector locked onto the coordinates from your arm. Sevrana looked down at her forearm. The glowing map had faded to a dull, throbbing gold, etched into her skin like a scar from a branding iron. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat. It is not random, she said quietly. This is the cradle of my ancestors. Before we built the cities of light, before the empire, we began here. Naldur, the world of first breath. Looks more like the world of last gasp, Rhys muttered. He engaged the landing thrusters. Strap in tight. I am going to put her down in that valley near the equator. If there are ruins, that is where the scanners say they will be. The descent was brutal. The Talon bucked against the atmospheric turbulence, shaking as it cut through layers of ancient dust. Lightning arced across the clouds, illuminating the landscape below in strobe light flashes. Sevrana saw jagged spires rising from the dust, vast monolithic structures that defied time, their tips broken and eroded by millennia of neglect. When they finally touched down, the silence that followed was heavier than the roar of the engines. Rhys exhaled a long breath and unbuckled his harness. He grabbed a heavy blaster rifle from the rack behind the seat and tossed a smaller energy pistol to Sevrana. You know how to use that? He asked. Sevrana caught the weapon. I was trained in the combat forms of the Royal Guard, Commander. I can shoot. Good, Rhys said, checking the charge on his rifle. Because ghost planets are rarely as empty as they look. The air outside was cold and smelled of dry earth and ozone. The wind howled through the canyons of the ruined city, creating a mournful, flute-like sound that set Sevrana's teeth on edge. They walked through the remains of a grand plaza. Massive statues of Lissari elders lined the path, their faces sheared off by time or war, leaving only their robes and their hands, which were raised in supplication to a sky that no longer cared. Sevrana moved with a strange familiarity, her hand trailing over the rough stone of a fallen pillar. She could feel the echoes of the people who had once lived here, their prayers, their fears, their hope. It was a graveyard of memories. This place, Rhys said, his voice low. It feels wrong, like the ground itself is holding a grudge. It is a holy place, Sevrana said, but holiness does not always mean goodness. They reached the entrance of the central temple, a colossal structure carved directly into the cliff face. The doors were gone, leaving a gaping maw of darkness. Sevrana raised her hand, and her palm glowed with soft, bioluminescent light, illuminating the way forward. Inside, the air was still and stale. They walked down a long corridor lined with frescoes. The paint was faded, peeling in strips like dead skin, but the images were still visible. Rhys stopped in front of a massive mural that dominated the central chamber. He shone his tactical light on it, the beam cutting through the gloom. Sevrana, he said, look at this. Sevrana stepped forward. The mural depicted a scene of terrifying grandeur. A woman, dressed in the royal robes of a Lissari princess, stood on a precipice. She was beautiful, her face twisted in a mask of sorrow and resolve. Before her, rising from a tear in the fabric of the universe, was a shadowy, void-like entity. It had no face, only a swirling darkness that seemed to drink the light around it. The princess in the painting was not fighting the entity. She was reaching out to it. From her chest, a stream of golden light, her soul, flowed into the void, feeding it. Below the image, in high Lissari script, were words Sevrana read aloud, her voice trembling. To bind the chaos, the heart must break. To save the light, the self must forsake. Rhys lowered his light. That is you, he said bluntly. That is exactly what you are trying to do. Find a monster. Offer it a deal. It is history, Sevrana said, though her blood ran cold. The legends say an ancestor made a pact to end the First War. She saved us. And what happened to her? Rhys pointed to the light at the bottom of the mural. There, the princess was depicted again. But she was no longer glowing. She was a gray, hollow shell, her eyes blank, standing alone in a field of stars. She had saved her people, but she had ceased to exist as a person. She paid the price, Sevrana whispered. Is that what you want? Rhys asked, his voice hardening. To become a battery for some cosmic god? To hollow yourself out so your council can keep drinking their wine in their crystal towers? I do not have a choice, Sevrana spun on him, her anger flaring. Do you think I want this, to lose myself, to die while my body keeps walking? My people are dying, Rhys. If I do not do this, the Vorm will consume everything, not just the Lissari, the humans, the traitors. You. Rhys stared at her, his jaw tight. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant whistle of the wind outside. I had a choice once, Rhys said quietly. He turned away, walking toward a stone bench that had survived the centuries. He sat down heavily, resting the rifle across his knees. During the Terran Rebellion, I was a lieutenant. We were pinned down on a moon called Acheron, mud and misery. Sevrana watched him, her anger fading into curiosity. He rarely spoke of his past. Command told us to hold the line, Rhys continued, staring at the dusty floor. They said reinforcements were 2 hours out. We held. For 3 days. We bled for every inch of that crater. And when the dropships finally came, they didn't land. They flew right over us to secure the mineral refineries in the next sector. He looked up at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw and unguarded. We weren't soldiers to them. We were a distraction, asset denial. I watched my squad die one by one, waiting for a rescue that was never coming. That is when I learned the truth. Princess, heroes are just currency spent by old men in safe rooms. I vowed then that I would never serve a cause again. I would never die for something that didn't bleed for me. Sevrana moved toward him. She sat beside him on the cold stone, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. I am sorry, she said softly. That was a betrayal. It was a lesson, Rhys corrected. He looked at her, and his expression softened. You are doing the same thing. You are throwing yourself on the wire so the rest of them can walk over you. It is different, she said. I am not following orders. I am choosing this. Are you? Rhys asked. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing a stray lock of silver hair from her face. Or is this just what you were told a princess is supposed to do? The touch sent a jolt through her, sharp and electric. She leaned into his hand instinctively. Suddenly, the map on her arm flared. Sevrana gasped as the golden lines ignited with blinding intensity. The light poured from her skin, projecting upward into the stagnant air of the chamber. It formed a three-dimensional hologram of the galaxy, swirling and shifting until it locked onto a specific sector within the Aurus Veil. The rift, Sevrana breathed, clutching her arm. It is showing us the way. Zhaltor is there. Rhys looked at the map, then back at her. The golden light of the hologram reflected in her violet eyes, making her look otherworldly. The cynicism in his face cracked, revealing a desperate kind of longing. Sevrana, he murmured. They leaned toward each other and the galaxy spun above their heads, but the only gravity that mattered was between them. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip. She could feel his breath, warm and ragged. A shadow detached itself from the darkness of the corridor. "Corruptor," a voice hissed. Rhys reacted on instinct. He shoved Sevrana behind him and raised his rifle, but the attacker was faster. A blur of motion, a flash of a plasma blade, and the rifle was sliced in half. Rhys stumbled back, drawing his combat knife. The assassin stepped into the light of the hologram. He was Lissari, tall and lithe, wearing the stealth armor of the Royal Shadow Guard. His face was hidden behind a smooth, featureless mask. "You soil her with your touch, human," the assassin said, his voice distorted. "The princess is a vessel for the divine. She is not for the likes of a smuggler." "Get back, Sevrana!" Rhys shouted, lunging forward. He met the assassin's charge with a brutal tackle, slamming him against a pillar. But the Lissari was stronger, enhanced by bio-augmentations. He threw Rhys off like a rag doll. Rhys hit the ground hard, rolling just in time to avoid a downward thrust of the plasma blade that scorched the stone where his head had been. Rhys scrambled up, slashing with his knife, but the assassin parried effortlessly and drove a knee into Rhys's ribs. Rhys grunted, collapsing as the air left his lungs. The assassin loomed over him, raising the blade for the killing stroke. For the purity of the bloodline. "No!" Sevrana screamed. She didn't think so. She didn't calculate. She acted. She grabbed the pistol Rhys had given her from the floor where she had dropped it. Her hands, usually so gentle, locked around the grip with lethal familiarity. She fired. The bolt of blue energy took the assassin in the neck, right at the seal of his armor. He froze. The plasma blade dropped from his hand, sizzling as it hit the stone. He turned slowly to look at her, his hand going to his throat, trying to stem the flow of cauterized light. He fell to his knees, then face forward. Silence rushed back into the chamber. Sevrana stood trembling, the gun smoking in her hand. She stared at the body. She had killed one of her own. A member of the guard she had grown up watching patrol the palace walls. "Sevrana," Rhys wheezed. He crawled over to her, ignoring his bruised ribs. He gently pried the gun from her rigid fingers and set it aside. "I killed him," she whispered, her voice breaking. He was just following orders." "He was going to kill me," Rhys said. He stood up and pulled her into his arms. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "He made his choice. I am a healer," she sobbed into his chest. "I am supposed to be a bringer of light." "You are alive," Rhys said fiercely, wrapping his arms tighter around her, shielding her from the sight of the body. "And so am I. You did what you had to do." He pulled back slightly to look her in the eyes. "Listen to me. You do not owe them your pain. You do not owe them your guilt. You saved me. That is the only thing that matters right now." She looked up at him, her eyes swimming with tears. The shock was fading, replaced by a rush of adrenaline and something else, a desperate need to feel life, to counter the cold reality of the death she had just dealt. "Rhys," she breathed. The night in the ruins was cold, but inside the small antechamber where they had made camp, the air was thick with heat. They had moved away from the main hall, away from the mural and the body. Rhys had started a small fire with chemical tablets from his survival kit. The blue flame cast dancing shadows on the walls. Sevrana sat beside him, her earlier trembling having settled into a quiet intensity. She watched him check his ribs, wincing slightly as he probed a bruise. "Let me," she said. She reached out, her hands glowing with a faint, soothing warmth. She placed her palms on his chest. The pain in his ribs dulled instantly, replaced by a comforting heat that seemed to seep into his bones. Rhys watched her face in the firelight. She looked ethereal, a creature of light and magic, yet her hands on his skin were undeniably human. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "Not anymore," he said. His voice was rough. He covered her hands with his own. Her skin was soft. His was calloused and scarred. The contrast was stark, a map of two different worlds colliding. Sevrana didn't pull away. She turned her hands over, interlacing her fingers with his. She looked at him with a vulnerability that stripped him of his defenses. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me something that is real. Something that isn't a prophecy or a duty or a lie." Rhys didn't speak. He leaned in and kissed her. I wasn't hesitant. It was a collision of need. He tasted like whiskey and survival. She tasted like starlight and sorrow. She made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer to him, her hands moving to the nape of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. Rhys groaned low in his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The firelight flickered as they sank back onto the thermal blankets. The galaxy outside, the Vorm, the assassin, it all ceased to exist. There was only the friction of skin, the ragged rhythm of breath, and the desperate, clawing need to be alive in a universe that wanted them dead. Sevrana guided his touch, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of feeling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't a princess or a savior. She was just a woman, and he was the only man who saw her. Later, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. They lay tangled together under the thermal blanket. Sevrana rested her head on Rhys's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. It was a grounding rhythm, a reminder that time was still moving. She traced the long scar on his shoulder with her fingertip. "Rhys?" "Yeah?" He sounded drowsy, content in a way he hadn't been in years. "If there was another way," she started, her voice hesitant. "If I could save them without going to Zhaltor, would you take me away? Would you fly us to the edge of the map and never look back?" Rhys tightened his arm around her. He was silent for a long moment, staring up at the shadowed ceiling of the ruin. "In a heartbeat," he said. "I would find a planet where the comms don't work and the sky is green and nobody knows what a princess is." Sevrana smiled sadly against his skin. "That sounds beautiful. But," Rhys continued, his voice shifting, becoming serious, "I know you. You wouldn't be happy. You would look at the stars every night and wonder who was dying because you ran away." She lifted her head to look at him. "And what about you? What would you do if I go into that temple and disappeared?" Rhys reached up and cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. His eyes were fierce, burning with a terrifying promise. "I told you," he said. "I don't lose passengers. If you go into the dark, Sevrana, I will follow you. I would follow you into the void itself. I will drag you back if I have to. You cannot fight a god, Rhys." "Watch me," he said. Sevrana kissed his palm, a silent seal on a promise she hoped he wouldn't have to keep. "We should go," she said, sitting up, the cold air hitting her bare skin. "The map showed the location, but we need the key. The legends say the gate of Zhaltor is locked to all but the worthy." "And where is this key?" Rhys asked, sitting up and reaching for his shirt. "The assassin," Sevrana realized suddenly. He was not just hunting us. He was guarding something. They dressed quickly, the intimacy of the moment stored away but not forgotten. It hung between them, a tether that was stronger than gravity. They returned to the main hall. Rhys knelt beside the body of the assassin. He searched the pouches on the armor belt. "Bingo," he muttered. He pulled out a heavy metallic object. It was a dodecahedron made of a dark, shifting metal that seemed to absorb the light. Etched into its surface were the same geometric patterns as the map on Sevrana's arm. "The key of Horus," Sevrana said, taking it. It hummed in her hand, reacting to her genetic signature. "With this, we can open the temple." "Then let's get off this rock," Reese said, standing up and slinging the broken strap of his rifle over his shoulder. "I have had enough of the ruins." The climb back to the ship was silent, but it was a companionable silence. They walked close enough that their arms brushed with every step. They boarded the Talon, the familiar smell of grease and recycled air welcoming them like a home. Reese threw himself into the pilot's seat and began the pre-flight sequence. "Systems green," he said. "Reactor is stable. Let's get some altitude." The ship roared to life, lifting off the dust of Naldur. As they broke the atmosphere and the black of space filled the viewport, Sevrana felt a tightness in her chest loosen. They were one step closer. "Setting course for the Horus Vale coordinates," Reese said. "I am going to—" He cut off. The lights in the cockpit flickered and died. The emergency red lighting slammed on. The console screens dissolved into static. "What is it?" Sevrana asked, alarmed. "Another drone attack?" "No," Reese said, his fingers flying over the dead keys. "We are locked out. Someone has remote accessed the mainframe. They have seized the controls." "That is impossible," Sevrana said. "Your encryption is military grade." "Someone has better," Reese grimaced. The static on the main view screen cleared. A face appeared. It was Kalen, Sevrana's half-brother. But he looked different. The sleek, perfect Lissari grooming was marred by silver implants that ran up his neck and into his jaw. Tech that looked suspiciously like Vorm integration. His eyes were black pools, devoid of the white sclera. "Hello, dear sister." Kalen's voice purred through the speakers. It had a metallic, dual-layered resonance. "Kalen," Sevrana breathed, stepping toward the screen. "What have you done to yourself?" "I have evolved," Kalen smiled, and the skin around his implants stretched unnaturally. "While you chase fairy tales and sleep with dirt-side smugglers, I have secured the future of our people. The Vorm do not want to destroy us. Sevrana, they want to perfect us." "You are insane," Reese snarled. "Release my ship." Kalen's gaze shifted to Reese. "Ah, the corruptor. I see my assassin failed. No matter. It gave me time to track your signal." "You are tracking us?" Sevrana asked. "I am everywhere now," Kalen said. "The Vorm are the network, and I am the node. I know where you are going. Jaltor. A foolish quest. The entity is a relic of a weak age. I will be there waiting. Sister, bring the key. Bring your pilot. I will fly the hope from your mind before I let you offer it to a dead god." The screen went black. The cockpit lights flickered back on. The hum of the engine returned to normal. "He let us go," Reese said, staring at the blank screen. "He wants us to come to him." Sevrana stood rigid, her hands clenched into fists. "He has joined them. He is not just a traitor anymore. He is an avatar of the enemy." Reese turned his chair. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was iron hard. "Then we don't just save the galaxy," Reese said, his voice cold and deadly. "We take him apart." Sevrana looked at Reese, then at the vast, swirling darkness of the nebula ahead. "Yes," she said. "We take him apart." The crash was not a descent. It was a collision between a metal brick and a wall of gravity. Kalen's remote hijack of the Talon had scrambled the navigation computer, sending them hurtling out of hyperspace into the gravity well of a moon that did not appear on any standard star chart. Kadra. Reese fought the controls, his muscles screaming as the G-force pinned him to the seat. The atmosphere outside was a kaleidoscope of violent greens and purples, thick with organic clouds that clung to the hull like oil. "Pull up!" Sevrana shouted, her hands gripping the edge of the console, her knuckles white. "I am trying!" Reese roared back, his voice strained. "The stabilizers are locked out. She is fighting me." The tree line rushed up to meet them, a canopy of titanic, spiraling trees that looked more like giant vertebrae than wood. Reese cut the main thrusters and fired the maneuvering jets in a desperate attempt to flatten their angle. They hit. The sound was deafening, the scream of tearing metal, the snap of ancient branches as thick as skyscrapers, and the sickening crunch of impact. The Talon plowed through the jungle floor, carving a trench of mud and bioluminescent roots for half a mile before slamming into a moss-covered ridge. Then, silence. Reese coughed, waving away the acrid smoke filling the cockpit. The emergency lights were flickering, casting a strobe effect over the wreckage. He tasted blood in his mouth. "Sevrana," he croaked, unbuckling his harness with shaking hands. She was slumped in the co-pilot seat, a trickle of violet blood running from her temple. Reese was beside her in a heartbeat, his fingers checking the pulse at her neck. It was strong. "Sevrana, wake up," he urged, shaking her gently. Her eyelids fluttered. She groaned, shifting in the seat. "Reese, did we die?" "Not yet," Reese said, helping her sit up. "But the ship is dead. Kalen fried the main drive before we hit the atmosphere." He kicked open the emergency hatch. The humid air of Kadra rushed in, heavy with the scent of wet earth and something sweeter, like rotting orchids. It was cloying, thick enough to coat the back of the throat. They stumbled out onto the jungle floor. The Talon was a smoking ruin half buried in the mud. Above them, the canopy was so dense it blocked out the sky. But the jungle itself provided light. Every leaf, every vine, every patch of moss pulsed with a rhythmic, shifting glow. "Where are we?" Sevrana asked, leaning against Reese for support. She looked at the towering plants, her eyes wide. "I can hear them." Reese frowned, drawing his pistol. "Hear what? The bugs?" "The trees," she whispered. "They are whispering." Reese scanned the perimeter. "The atmosphere is breathable, but high in hallucinogenic spores. We need to seal the suits or find a cave, then if we stay out here, we are going to start seeing things." But it was already too late. The sweet scent became stronger. It wasn't just a smell. It was a presence. The spores of Kadra were not merely toxic. They were sentient defense mechanisms, designed to trap prey by reading the electrical impulses of the brain and feeding them back as reality. "Reese?" Sevrana said, her voice sounding distant. She pulled away from him, her eyes losing focus. "Mother is here." "Sevrana, wait!" Reese reached for her, but the ground beneath him seemed to liquefy. The jungle dissolved. Sevrana was no longer standing in the mud. She was standing on the polished marble balcony of the summer palace on Lysara. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky in bands of gold and crimson. It was her 10th birthday. She wore a dress of woven light, itchy and stiff. Her mother, Queen Alara, stood by the railing, her back to Sevrana. The queen was tall, radiant, and terrifyingly beautiful. "Mother?" Sevrana asked. "I finished my lessons. The tutor said I mastered the light weave." The queen turned, but her face was not the warm mask Sevrana remembered from the public portraits. It was cold, devoid of affection. "It is not enough," Ilara said. Her voice was not a sound but a vibration in Sevrana's bones. "You are small, Sevrana. Your light is a candle in a storm. I can get stronger. the child Sevrana pleaded. Strength is not the issue, the queen said, walking toward her. As she moved, the balcony began to crack. The beautiful marble turned to gray dust. It is your nature. You feel too much. A ruler must be stone. A savior must be ice. The scene shifted violently. Sevrana was older now, 18, standing in the council chamber. But the councillors were faceless shadows. Her mother sat on the throne, holding a jagged shard of darkness. We made a bargain, Ilara said, holding out the shard. Before you were born, the Lissari line was failing. Sevrana, we needed power. We needed a bridge to the ancient ones. No! Sevrana backed away. That is a lie. Is it? Ilara smiled, and her teeth were made of black glass. Why do you think you can hear the stars? Why do you think Zhaltor calls you? You were never meant to rule. My daughter, you were meant to be meat, a sacrifice to buy us another 1,000 years of comfort. I am not a sacrifice, Sevrana screamed. You are nothing, Ilara whispered, looming over her. Look at your soul. Sevrana looked down at her chest. Her skin was transparent. Inside, where her heart of light should have been, there was a crack, a fissure running deep into her essence. And from the crack, pieces of herself were flaking away, drifting into the wind like dead embers. Broken, the queen hissed. Fractured, empty. Rhys was drowning. He wasn't in the water. He was in the void, cold, absolute, and heavy. It pressed against his eyes, his lungs, his mind. He was floating in the wreckage of a space battle. Debris from the Terran fleet drifted past. Hull plates, frozen bodies, shattered weapons. But it wasn't the Battle of Acheron. It was a battle that hadn't happened yet. Rhys! The voice came from everywhere. He spun in zero gravity. Sevrana was drifting 10 feet away. She was wearing the white robes of the sacrificial mural. Her eyes were fixed on something behind him. Grab my hand, Rhys shouted. He tried to swim toward her, but his limbs felt like lead. The distance between them didn't close. It is too late, Commander! A voice boomed. It was Zhaltor. The entity was not visible, but his presence was a weight that crushed the stars. You promised to follow her, but you cannot follow where she goes. Sevrana began to glow, not the warm light of the Lissari, but a blinding, searing white energy. She was burning up. Her skin was peeling away, dissolving into pure photon energy. Rhys, she said, her voice calm and terrifying. You let me go. No, Rhys screamed. He clawed at the vacuum, his fingernails tearing. I didn't. I tried to save you. You are a soldier, Sevrana said. Soldiers follow orders. You delivered the package. You got paid. You are not a package, Rhys roared. You are everything. Look at her, Zhaltor mocked. Rhys looked. Sevrana's face was blank. The memory was gone. She didn't know him. She looked at him with the indifference of a stranger. I don't know you, she said. And then she shattered, like a glass statue hit by a hammer. She exploded into a million shards of light, leaving Rhys alone in the dark. No, Rhys gasped, inhaling sharply. The void vanished. He was on his knees in the mud. The jungle of Kadra hummed around him. He was sweating, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. It was a hallucination. The spores. He forced himself to breathe, to focus on the pain in his ribs, the smell of the mud, real things. Ground yourself, he thought. It isn't real. He looked up. Sevrana was standing a few feet away, trapped in the roots of a massive tree. Her eyes were open but unseeing, filled with tears. She was trembling violently, her hands clawing at her chest as if trying to hold herself together. Mother, please, she whimpered. Do not break me. Rhys scrambled toward her. The vines seemed to recoil from his sudden movement. He grabbed her shoulders. "Sevrana!" he shouted. "Sevrana, listen to me, you are not there." She didn't hear him. She flinched from his touch, crying out, "I am empty, I am just a vessel." Rhys gritted his teeth. The spores were feeding on her fear, amplifying it, locking her in a loop of self-destruction. He had to break the connection. He had to give her something stronger than the fear. He cupped her face with both hands, forcing her head up. Her violet eyes were swirling with panic, looking through him, not at him. "You are not empty," Rhys said, his voice rough and fierce. "You are here, with me, on Kadra. Feel this." He didn't shake her. He didn't shout again. He leaned in and pressed his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes and focused everything he had, every ounce of his stubborn, cynical, protective will, into that point of contact. "I am here," he whispered. "I am real. The mud is real. The pain is real. Come back to me." He moved his hand to her chest, over her heart. He could feel it racing. "Feel my hand," he commanded softly. "It is warm. It is dirty. It is real." Sevrana gasped. The vision of the queen faltered. The marble balcony cracked, revealing the jungle behind it. The cold voice of her mother was drowned out by the rough, steady rasp of Rhys's breathing. She blinked. The image of the broken soul faded. She saw Rhys. His face was smeared with dirt, his scar stark white against his flushed skin, his gray eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "Rhys?" she choked out. "I have got you," he said, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I have got you. It was a dream. Just a dream." She collapsed against him, her legs giving way. Rhys caught her, lowering them both to the jungle floor, his back against the root of the tree. She buried her face in his neck, sobbing deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. He held her. He didn't say anything about the mission or the Vorm or the time they were losing. He just wrapped his arms around her and became the wall she needed. Hours passed. The jungle's bioluminescence shifted from green to a soft, oceanic blue as the moon's rotation changed. The hallucinations had faded, kept at bay by the adrenaline and the sheer exhaustion of their emotional purge. They sat on a high branch of the tree far above the mud, watching the strange floating seeds of the forest drift like jellyfish through the air. Sevrana had stopped crying. She sat close to Rhys, her shoulder pressed against his. "I saw my mother," she said quietly. "She told me I was born to die, that my life was a transaction." Rhys took a sip from his canteen and passed it to her. "Parents have a way of messing us up. My father wanted me to be a farmer. Told me the stars were for dreamers and fools." "Was he right?" Sevrana asked, taking the canteen. "About the fool part, maybe," Rhys said. A dry smile touched his lips. "But I would have made a terrible farmer. I hate dirt." Sevrana looked down at her hands. It felt so real. "Rhys, the feeling of being hollow, of being nothing but a key to a lock I do not understand." "That is what Kalen wants you to think," Rhys said. "That is what the council wants. If you are just a tool, they don't have to feel guilty about using you." He turned to look at her. The blue light softened the sharp angles of her face, making her look tragically young. "But you are not a tool, Sevrana. You are the woman who shot an assassin to save a washed-up smuggler. You are the woman who finds beauty in a broken engine. Tools don't do that. Souls do that." Sevrana looked at him, and the intensity in her eyes took his breath away. She reached out and took his hand, interlacing their fingers. "The galaxy," she whispered, her voice trembling but certain. "The millions of worlds. The history of my people. It is all so heavy. But right now, It feels small. She squeezed his hand. The galaxy does not deserve salvation if it means losing you, she said. The words hung in the air, heavier than the humidity. Reese stared at her. His heart slammed against his ribs. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He wanted to give her a noble speech about duty and the greater good. But he couldn't, because she was right. In that moment, he would have watched a dozen stars burn out just to keep her safe. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers again. "We will find another way," he promised, his voice a low growl. "We will find Jaltor. But we are not making his deal. We will force him to help. We will cheat. We will steal, I don't care, but you are coming back with me." "You cannot cheat a god," she whispered, though hope flared in her eyes. "I have cheated death, taxes, and the Terran Federation." Reese grinned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "A god is just a bully with better special effects." Before Savrana could answer, a harsh static noise cut through the jungle's hum. Reese stiffened. He pulled a small, battered survival radio from his belt. The light was blinking red. "That is the emergency frequency," he said, frowning. "Someone is broadcasting on the open channel." He turned the dial. The static cleared, replaced by a voice that made Savrana's blood turn to ice. "Citizens of the Lissari Empire, the terrorist Savrana has been located. She has allied herself with human criminals to destabilize our defenses, effective immediately. The High Council has granted me emergency executive powers. The Light Guard fleet is under my direct command. Any ship aiding the fugitive will be fired upon. We are instituting a galactic blockade." It was Kalen. "He has the fleet," Savrana whispered, horror dawning on her face. "He has not just taken the throne. He has taken the military. He can block the path to the Horus Veil." "He is trying to box us in," Reese said, staring at the radio. "If he has the fleet, we can't get near the nebula. A single freighter against a blockade? That is suicide." "We cannot fight them," Savrana said, "and we cannot run." Reese looked at the radio, then at Savrana. His mind was racing, calculating odds, angles, and escape routes. He thought of his promise to find another way. "We don't need to fight them alone," Reese said slowly, "and we don't need to run." "What do you mean?" "You said there were others," Reese said. "When we met the seer, you said there were dissidents, rebels who didn't buy the Council's lies." "The remnant," Savrana nodded. "But they are scattered. They are hiding in the asteroid belt of the Vexor system. They have few ships, old weapons." "Ships are ships," Reese said, standing up on the branch. "And if Kalen is squeezing the galaxy, people get desperate. Desperate people fight harder." "You want to start a war?" Savrana asked, standing beside him. "No," Reese said, holstering the radio. "I want to start a distraction, a big one, big enough to slip us through the blockade." They managed to salvage the sublight communication array from the wreckage of the Talon. It took hours of hot wiring and cursing, but Reese managed to boost the signal using the atmospheric ionization of the moon. Savrana broadcast the code Oila the Seer had given her. It was a simple sequence of pulses, a heartbeat in the dark. They waited. 4 hours later, a dropship descended through the clouds. It wasn't a sleek Lissari craft. It was a cobbled-together mining hauler, painted matte black. It landed in the clearing. The ramp lowered, and a dozen armed figures emerged. They were a mix of races, Lissari outcasts with their light dimmed, humans in ragged armor, and hulking reptilian mercenaries. The leader, a scarred Lissari woman named Tora, stepped forward. She looked at the wreckage of the Talon, then at Savrana. "You look like hell, princess," Tora said. She didn't bow. "I feel like it," Savrana said, holding her head high despite the mud on her tunic. We need passage to Vexor, to the base. Tora spat on the ground. Kalen has a bounty on your head the size of a moon. Why should I not just collect it? Because if you do... Reese stepped forward, his hand on his pistol. You will be spending that money while the Vorm eats your children. Kalen isn't just a tyrant, he is a puppet. Tora looked at Reese, then back to Savrana. She saw the determination in the princess's eyes, the steel that had replaced the fear. Get on board, Tora grunted. But if you lead the fleet to us, I will space you myself. The rebel base was carved into the heart of a massive asteroid in the Vexor belt. It was a grim, industrial place. Airlocks that smelled of sulfur, corridors lit by flickering emergency strips, and the constant vibration of mining drills repurposing the rock for defense. Savrana stood in the center of the command deck. It was crowded with the leaders of the remnant factions. They were tired, angry people. They had been fighting a losing war against the Council for years. You ask us to die for a myth, an old general growled, slamming his fist on the table. Zhaltor, the ghost god. We have limited resources, princess. We cannot waste ships chasing fairy tales while Kalen bombs our colonies. It is not a fairy tale, Savrana's voice rang out, silencing the room. She stepped forward and ripped the sleeve of her tunic. The star map on her arm pulsed with a fierce golden light. It projected the complex, shifting path through the Orus Veil, leading to the rift. A gasp went through the room. The Vorm marked me because they fear this, Savrana said. They know the only thing that can stop them is in that rift. Kalen knows it. That is why he has blockaded the sector. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the key of Orus, the dodecahedron they had taken from the assassin. She placed it on the table. It resonated with the map on her arm, floating a few inches off the surface and humming with a deep, bass note that rattled the teeth of everyone present. I have the map, Savrana said. I have the key, and I have the will. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every skeptic. I know what you think of me, the pampered girl from the Crystal Spire, but I am not asking you to fight for a throne. I am asking you to fight for survival. If we do not reach Zhaltor, the Vorm will come, and they will not care about your politics or your rebellions. They will consume it all. Tora crossed her arms. And the cost. The legends say Zhaltor takes a toll. He does, Savrana said softly. She looked at Reese, who was standing in the shadows by the door. He takes the soul. A silence fell over the room. You would do that? Tora asked, her voice losing its edge. You would give yourself to the void? To save my people? Savrana said. Yes. The general looked at the map, then at the key. He exchanged a look with Tora. If we engage the fleet, the general said slowly, it will be a slaughter. We can't win a direct fight. We don't need to win. Reese spoke up. He walked into the light. We just need to bleed them. Create a hole in the line. One narrow corridor for a fast ship to punch through. And who flies that ship? Tora asked. I do, Reese said. And I will need something faster than that mining hauler. The rebels voted. It was not unanimous, but desperation is a powerful motivator. They agreed. They gave Reese a ship. It was an interceptor, a sleek, predatory vessel stripped of weapons to make room for oversized engines and shield generators. It was a suicide runner, built for speed and nothing else. The hangar bay was chaotic. Mechanics were rushing to prep the interceptor, loading fuel cells and running diagnostics. The roar of engines echoed off the asteroid walls. Savrana stood by the airlock ramp. She was dressed in a flight suit the rebels had found for her, utilitarian gray, stripped of all royal insignia. She looked more like a warrior than a princess. Reese walked over to her. He checked the straps on her suit, adjusting a buckle with trembling hands. "This is it," he said. "Once we launch, there is no turning back. The fleet will be on us in minutes." "I am ready," Sevrana said, but her eyes were wet. "Hey," Reese said softly. He cupped her face. The noise of the hangar seemed to fade away. "You heard what they said," Sevrana whispered. "No one comes back whole. If I lose myself, Reese—" "Don't!" He cut her off. "Don't say it. You need to know," she insisted. "If I come back and I am not me, do not stay. Do not watch me fade. Promise me you will go. Find that green sky we talked about." Reese stared at her. The thought of her empty, of her looking at him with blank eyes, was a knife in his gut. He pulled her close, crushing her against him. He kissed her deeply, desperately. It was a kiss that tasted of finality, of a love found at the end of the world. He poured everything he couldn't say into it, the fear, the devotion, the anger at a universe that demanded so much from someone so gentle. When he pulled back, he kept his forehead pressed to hers. "I am not going anywhere," he whispered fiercely. "Whatever it costs. Sevrana, whatever he takes from you, I will find a way to bring you back. I will steal you back from hell if I have to." "Reese, get on the ship," he commanded gently, turning her toward the ramp. "We have a galaxy to save." Sevrana climbed the ramp. She looked back once, her silhouette framed by the harsh hangar lights. She looked terrified, and she looked magnificent. Reese watched her disappear into the hull. He took a breath, steeling himself against the dread coiling in his stomach. He slapped the hull of the interceptor. "All right," he muttered to the empty air. "Let's go punch a god in the face." The rebel interceptor, which Reese had stubbornly rechristened the Talon the moment the airlock sealed, screamed through the void. Behind them, the Vexor system was burning. The distraction led by Tora and the Remnant had worked, drawing the bulk of the Lissari blockade into a chaotic, suicidal skirmish near the asteroid belt. It had opened a hole in the net, a singular, fracturing corridor of space just wide enough for a pilot with nothing to lose. Reese Calder was that pilot. "Stabilizers are useless," Reese gritted out, his hands fighting the yoke as the ship bucked violently. "Physics stopped applying 3 minutes ago." Sevrana sat in the co-pilot seat, her face pale, illuminated by the strobe light flickering of the console. She was clutching the key of Horus in her lap. The artifact was humming, a deep, resonant vibration that rattled the rivets of the hull. "We are entering Vrayan's Maw," she said, her voice tight. "The rift is not just a location. Reese, it is a scar in the universe. Gravity, time, light, they are all broken here." Ahead of them, the stars were gone. In their place was a swirling vortex of impossible colors, bruised purples, sickly greens, and a black so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing against the reinforced glass of the viewport. Drifting within the vortex were colossal fragments of stone, islands of rock the size of cities, suspended in the anti-gravity churn. It was the graveyard of reality. "I see the signal," Reese said, narrowing his eyes. "That structure in the center, it is not drifting, it is anchored." It was a temple, or the corpse of one. Massive, broken pillars of obsidian floated around a central dais that defied the chaos swirling around it. It hung in the eye of the storm, silent and terrifying. "Jal Tor," Sevrana whispered. The ship lurched as they hit the event horizon of the rift. The sensation was nauseating, a feeling of being stretched thin, as if their very atoms were being pulled apart and reassembled. The alarms on the dashboard didn't just wail, they distorted, slowing down into a demonic growl before speeding up into a piercing shriek. "I can't land this thing," Reese shouted over the roar of the hull groaning under the stress. "I have to crash it." "Do it," Savrana cried. Reese killed the engines and fired the reverse thrusters in a burst of desperate deceleration. The Talon skidded across the surface of the floating temple platform, sparks showering like fireworks as the landing gear sheared off. Metal screamed against stone, tearing a gouge in the ancient floor before the ship slammed into the base of a toppled pillar and came to a shuddering halt. Silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. Reese unbuckled, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. He kicked the hatch open. "Everyone out. This atmosphere is leaking in, and I don't trust the seals." They scrambled out onto the obsidian platform. The air here was thin, tasting of ozone and copper. Above them, the vortex swirled, a cyclone of silent lightning. Savrana stood up, brushing the dust from her flight suit. She looked toward the entrance of the temple, a gaping archway leading into absolute darkness. The key in her hand was pulsing rapidly now, a frantic heartbeat of light. "He is here," she said. Reese drew his blaster, though the weapon felt ridiculously heavy, as if the intent to use violence weighed more here than in the normal world. "Stay close to me. We go in, we find this entity, we make the deal, we leave. No getting separated." "Reese." Savrana turned to him. She looked terrified, but her jaw was set. "If we get separated, keep moving. Do not look back." "We are not getting separated," he said firmly, grabbing her hand. They walked into the dark. The interior of the temple was not a building. It was a labyrinth of shadows. The floor seemed to ripple like water under their boots. There were no walls, only pillars that stretched up into an infinite gloom. They had walked for perhaps 10 minutes, or perhaps 10 hours. Time felt viscous here when the separation happened. It was not a trapdoor or a falling rock. It was a shift in geometry. Reese was holding Savrana's hand. He felt her skin, warm and real against his palm. He blinked, a momentary reflex. When his eyes opened a fraction of a second later, his hand was closed around empty air. He spun around. "Savrana." She was gone. The corridor behind him was empty. The pillar she had been standing next to was gone. "Savrana!" he screamed, his voice echoing into the void. The echo did not return his own voice. Instead, it returned the sound of gunfire. Reese froze. The sound was distinct, the rapid, staccato crack of Terran pulse rifles. It was the sound of the Battle of Acheron. "No," Reese whispered, backing away. "No, this is not real." The shadows around him began to coalesce. They took human shapes, ragged, bloody shapes. Men and women in torn Federation armor, their faces obscured by mud and burns. "Lieutenant," a voice rasped. Reese turned. Standing before him was Corporal Hines, his old radio operator. Hines had died in Reese's arms 5 years ago, gutted by a shrapnel blast. Now, he stood there, the hole in his stomach weeping black smoke. "You left us, Lieutenant," Hines said. His voice was wet. "You survived. Why did you survive?" "I didn't leave you," Reese said, his voice shaking. He raised his blaster, but his hand trembled. "We held the line. I held the line." "You are a tourist, Reese," another voice sneered. It was the assassin from Naldur, the Lizari he had failed to stop. "You play at being a hero, but you are just a man who runs away. You are running now." "I am looking for her," Reese shouted. "Where is she?" "She is dying," Hines said, stepping closer. The other shadows surged forward, a wall of accusing dead. "She is dying because you are too weak to save her, just like you were too weak to save us." Reese squeezed his eyes shut. "Get out of my head." He fired the blaster. The bolt of energy passed through Hines harmlessly, dissipating into the mist. The shadows laughed, a sound like grinding stones. Reese holstered the weapon. Violence wouldn't work here. This was a test of will. He opened his eyes. He forced himself to look at the horrors, at the faces of the men he had failed. He didn't look away. "I know I failed you," Reese said, his voice low and hard. "I carry that every day. I can't change it." He took a step forward, walking straight toward the specter of Hines. "But I am not failing her." He walked through the ghost. The sensation was like walking through ice water, a chill that bit into his marrow. But he emerged on the other side. The corridor shifted, the ghosts dissolved, but the labyrinth stretched on, winding and turning, designed to break the mind of anyone foolish enough to enter. Reese began to run. Sevrana did not scream when Reese vanished. She knew, with the instinct of the bloodline, that he was gone from her sight but not from existence. She stood alone in a vast circular chamber. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting a sky that did not exist, a sky full of dying stars. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a column of anti-time, was Jaltor. He was not a man. He was not a statue. He was a tear in the fabric of the universe, a humanoid shape composed of shimmering dark matter, outlined in a corona of blinding violet light. He had no face, yet he watched her. He had no mouth, yet he spoke. "The daughter of Lysara," the voice said. It did not come from the entity. It resonated inside her skull, a sound that tasted like iron. "You bring the key. You bring a desperate heart." Sevrana stepped forward. The air pressure was immense, pushing her down, commanding her to kneel. She refused. She stood tall, clutching the key of Horus. "I seek the salvation of my people," Sevrana said. "I seek the end of the Vorm." "The Vorm," Jaltor mused. The darkness of his form swirled. "The eaters of entropy. They are a natural force, little princesses. A forest fire clears the dead wood. Why should I stop the fire?" "Because we are not dead wood," Sevrana cried. "We are living, breathing beings. We love each other. We create. We have value." "Value," the entity echoed. "Let us test this value." The chamber dissolved. Sevrana was suddenly floating in the void. She was a giant, larger than the sun. Below her, the galaxy spun like a toy. "Look," Jaltor commanded. As she looked, she saw the Vorm fleets moving like a plague of locusts. She saw them descend on Lysara. She saw the cities of light shatter. She saw her brother, Kalen, betrayed by his masters, consumed by the biomechanical horror he had embraced. She saw the human colonies burn. She saw the silence spread until the galaxy was nothing but a cold, dead grave. "This is inevitable," Jaltor said. "The Vorm is infinite. Your fleets are finite." "Show me another way," Sevrana pleaded. "You showed my ancestor a way." "I showed her a trade," Jaltor corrected. The vision shifted. Now, Sevrana saw a different future. She saw herself, or a version of herself, standing in the center of the rift. She was glowing with a power that rivaled a supernova. She saw this energy explode outward, not as destruction, but as a barrier, a galactic shield. It rippled across the sectors, a wall of pure, impenetrable will that the Vorm crashed against and shattered. The Vorm retreated. The galaxy was safe. The Lysari rebuilt. The humans prospered. But then the vision zoomed in. It showed the Sevrana of that future. She was sitting on a throne in the High Council. She was beautiful, perfect, and ageless. But her eyes were empty. Reese walked into the throne room. He was older, grayer. He walked up to her, tears in his eyes. He took her hand. "Sevrana?" the vision Reese asked. The vision Sevrana looked at him and tilted her head. Who are you? She asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of recognition, devoid of warmth. You are not authorized to be here. Reese turned and walked away. A broken man. The vision ended. Sevrana was back in the obsidian chamber, gasping for breath. The shield requires a source, Jaltor explained. It requires a perpetual engine of psychic resonance. A soul, stripped of all distraction, all memory, all self, focused eternally on a single task, protection. He leaned forward, the dark matter swirling. You can save them, Sevrana, all of them. The children in the slums, the council in their towers, even the pilot who screams your name in my labyrinth right now. But the price is you, not your life, yourself. You will exist, but you will not know why. You will not know him. Sevrana fell to her knees. The cruelty of the choice tore at her chest. To live, but to be dead to the one person who made her feel alive. Why? She wept. Why must it be this way? Because power without sacrifice is tyranny, Jaltor said simply. To wield the power of a god, you must cease to be a person. Reese was bleeding. He had fought things that had no names, shadow beasts with claws made of doubt, shifting walls of razor-sharp glass. His flight suit was torn, his face cut, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side, dislocated in a fall from a shifting staircase. But he was still moving. Sevrana, he roared, kicking down a door that looked like a weeping eye. He stumbled into a vast circular chamber. He saw her. She was on her knees in the center of the room, bathed in the violet light of the monster that loomed over her. Sevrana! Reese yelled, stumbling forward. An invisible wall slammed him backward. He hit the floor hard, gritting his teeth against the pain in his arm. He scrambled up, hammering his fist against the barrier. Let her go, he screamed at the entity. Take me! I am the one with the blood on my hands. Take me! Jaltor did not look at Reese. He looked only at Sevrana. The pilot offers himself, Jaltor said to her. But his soul is too scarred. It is a jagged thing, full of cracks. It cannot hold the shield. It would shatter in a nanosecond. Only the Lissari light, pure and unbroken, can fuel the barrier. Sevrana looked up. She turned her head slowly and saw Reese. He was battered, bloody, his face twisted in absolute terror, not for himself, but for her. He was pounding on the invisible wall, mouthing her name, begging her to get up, to run. She saw the love in his eyes when it was raw, real, and terrified, and she knew. She knew that if she walked away, if she rejected the bargain, they might have a few years, maybe a decade. They could run to that green sky he talked about. They could love each other desperately while the galaxy burned around them. But eventually, the dark would come. The Vorm would find them. And she would watch Reese die. She would watch the light go out of those gray eyes. She could not survive that. She looked back at Jaltor. The tears streamed down her face, hot and fast. If I do this, she whispered, her voice trembling. They live. All of them? They live, Jaltor confirmed. The Vorm will be banished. And him, she pointed to Reese, will he be safe? He will live a long life, Jaltor said. He will mourn you, but he will live. Sevrana closed her eyes. She took a breath, inhaling the scent of ozone and ancient stone. She summoned every memory of the last few weeks, the way Reese laughed when he was trying to hide his pain, the warmth of his hand on hers in the jungle of Kaidra, the taste of his kiss in the hangar bay. She packed those memories into a tight ball in the center of her heart. She locked them away where she hoped, praying to a universe that didn't listen, that a fragment might survive the erasure. She stood up. No! Reese screamed, realizing what she was doing. Sevrana, don't! We can find another way, don't do it! She turned to him one last time. She pressed her hand against the invisible barrier, matching the spot where his fist was. I am sorry, Reese, she said, her voice soft, but carrying clearly across the silence. I cannot watch you die. I don't care, Reese sobbed, sliding down the wall. I don't want a world without you in it. You have to live, she said. A sad, beautiful smile touched her lips. You have to live for both of us. She turned back to Jaltor. She raised her chin. I accept the bargain, she said clearly. If I am to be lost, let it be for love's sake. Jaltor extended a hand of swirling darkness. It is done. A beam of blinding violet energy shot from the entity's hand. It struck Sevrana in the chest. She arched her back, a silent scream tearing from her throat. Reese watched, helpless, as the light of her soul was ripped to the surface. It wasn't gentle. It was an extraction. The golden bioluminescence of the Lissari flared brighter than a sun, blinding Reese, forcing him to shield his eyes. The key of Horus, which lay on the floor, rose up and embedded itself into the energy stream. The light condensed. It turned solid. It etched itself into Sevrana's flesh. A scar, luminous, jagged, and burning with the power of a captive star, carved its way from her collarbone to her sternum. It was the mark of the shield, the brand of the god. The light exploded outward, passing through the temple, through the rift, shooting out into the galaxy beyond. Sevrana gasped, a sound like a vacuum seal breaking. Her body went rigid. Then, like a puppet with its strings cut, she collapsed. The invisible barrier shattered. Reese scrambled forward. He ignored the pain in his arm, the exhaustion in his legs. He slid across the obsidian floor and gathered her into his arms. Sevrana, he screamed. She was cold, so incredibly cold. Her skin, usually warm with Lissari energy, felt like marble. Her chest rose and fell in a shallow, mechanical rhythm, but there was no tension in her muscles. Her eyes were closed. The glowing scar on her chest pulsed with a steady, rhythmic beat. Thump, 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 the heartbeat of the new galactic shield. Sevrana, wake up, Reese begged, shaking her. He brushed the hair from her face. Please, please, baby, wake up. Look at me. Her eyelids fluttered. Reese held his breath, his heart stopping. She opened her eyes. They were violet. They were beautiful. And they were absolutely empty. She looked at the ceiling. Then she looked at Reese. There was no recognition, no spark, no love. Just a biological optical sensor processing visual data. Sevrana? Reese whispered, his voice breaking into a sob. She did not answer. She did not blink. She just lay there, a living artifact, breathing but not existing. Reese pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her neck. He rocked back and forth, his body shaking with the force of his grief. He screamed. It was a raw, animal sound that echoed through the empty temple, bouncing off the cold pillars and the silent, watching God. He screamed until his throat bled, a eulogy for the woman who had just saved the universe by destroying herself. Above them, Jaltor began to fade, his work complete, leaving the human and the vessel alone in the drifting ruins of time. She woke to the sound of a hum. It was a constant low-frequency vibration that seemed to rattle in the marrow of her bones. She opened her eyes. The ceiling was gray metal, stamped with industrial serial numbers and stained with condensation. The light was dim, an amber emergency glow that cast long, shivering shadows across the room. She lay still. She did not know where she was. She did not know how she had arrived here. She did not know who she was. She sat up. The movement was fluid, her body reacting with a grace that felt practiced. yet her mind could not recall the practice. She looked down at her hands. They were pale, slender, and shaking. She turned them over, examining the lines of her palms as if they were maps to a country she had never visited. Then she looked at her chest. Her breath hitched, etched into her skin, running from the hollow of her throat down to her sternum, was a scar. But it was not a mark of torn flesh. It was a mark of light. It glowed with a soft, rhythmic pulse, gold and violet, beating in time with a heart she wasn't sure belonged to her. It felt cold, like a piece of deep space had been stitched into her ribs. "You are awake." The voice came from the corner of the room. It was rough, like gravel grinding on steel, but wrapped in a layer of terrifying gentleness. She flinched, pulling her knees to her chest. She looked toward the shadows. A man was sitting there in a metal folding chair. He looked wrecked. His face was covered in stubble that was turning gray. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark bruises of exhaustion. He wore a flight suit that was torn at the shoulder, stained with dried blood and grease. He held a plastic cup of water in his hands, but he wasn't drinking. He was just staring at her. He looked at her as if she were a ghost, or a miracle, or a tragedy, perhaps all three. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was a rasp, unused and dry. The words felt foreign in her mouth, shapes she had to consciously form. The man flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of the jaw, but she saw it. Pain washed over his face, raw and unguarded, before he locked it away behind a mask of neutral calm. "I am Reese," he said. "Reese," she repeated. The name meant nothing. It was just a sound. But when she said it, the man's knuckles turned white around the plastic cup. "And who am I?" Reese stood up. He moved slowly, like an old man, though his body looked hard and capable. He walked to the small sink unit built into the wall and filled another cup with water. He brought it to her. "Drink," he said. "You have been out for 4 days." She took the cup. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was calloused and warm. A jolt of electricity, static, surely, zipped up her arm. She pulled back quickly, spilling a little water. He did not react to the spill. He just watched her. "You don't have a name right now," Reese said softly. "Not one that matters. We can find a new one if you want." "I do not want a new one," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her tone. "I want my own." Reese looked away, staring at the bulkhead behind her. "Your name is Sevrana. Sevrana." She tasted the word. It felt heavy. It felt like a title, not a name. It felt like a burden. Am I yours?" She didn't know why she asked. It was the way he looked at her with that terrible, possessive grief, as if he had lost her and found her and was currently losing her again. Reese closed his eyes. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "No," he whispered. "You belong to the galaxy now. I am just the pilot." The days that followed were a blur of quiet routines. The ship, Reese called it the Talon, though the registration plate on the airlock said Interceptor Delta 9, was small. It smelled of recycled air, engine coolant, and stale coffee. It was a lonely metal box drifting through the void, and it became her entire universe. Reese was patient. That was the first thing she learned about him. He was infinitely, heartbreakingly patient. She had forgotten everything. She didn't know how to operate the food synthesizer. She didn't know what a fork was. She stared at the shower unit for 20 minutes until he gently explained how the sonic pulses worked. He taught her like one would teach a child, but he never treated her like one. He spoke to her with respect, with a gravity that suggested she was someone important, even if she couldn't remember why. "This is a spoon," he said, sitting across from her at the small mess table. You use it for the broth. She picked up the metal utensil. It felt balanced in her hand. She dipped it into the bowl. Why are we here, Reese? She asked, watching the steam rise from the broth. Where are we going? We are drifting, Reese said. He was picking at his own food, his eyes constantly scanning the sensor readouts on the data pad next to his plate. The engines need an overhaul. We are in deep space, safe. Safe from what? Everything, he said darkly. He never slept. Or at least, she never saw him sleep. Whenever she woke up in the small bunk, he was there, sitting in the pilot's chair, watching the stars, or tinkering with a circuit board, or simply watching her. There was a tension in the ship that made the air feel thick. She felt drawn to him. It was a physical pull, magnetic and confusing. When he was in the room, she felt anchored. When he left to check the engine room, she felt a rising panic, a sense of vertigo as if gravity had failed. She would catch him looking at her when he thought she was absorbed in studying the star charts he gave her. His gaze was hungry, desperate, tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her neck. But the moment she looked up, he would look away, his face shutting down. He wouldn't touch her. He avoided it militantly. If they passed in the narrow corridor, he would press himself flat against the wall to ensure they didn't brush shoulders. If he handed her a tool or a plate, he was careful to hold it by the very edge. It frustrated her. She didn't know why, but his distance felt like a rejection. One evening, or what passed for evening in the eternal night of space, she found him in the cockpit. He was staring out at the viewport. Reese, she said. He turned. He looked exhausted. Come here, he said. I want to show you something. She walked over to the console. He pointed out the window. Look. She looked. The stars were dense here, a thick dusting of diamond dust against the black. But it wasn't just stars. In the distance, vast clouds of nebula gas swirled in colors of bruise purple and blood orange. It is beautiful, she whispered. It is the Orus Veil, Reese said. His voice was tight. You used to tell me that your people could hear the stars, that you were made of light. She looked at her hands. I don't hear anything, just the hum of the ship. Give it time, Reese said, or don't. Maybe silence is better. She turned to look at him. He was close. She could smell him, oil, sweat, and something sharp like ozone. She wanted to reach out and touch the scar on his cheek. Her hand twitched, moving upward of its own accord. Reese saw the movement. He stepped back sharply, almost knocking over his chair. I need to check the aft stabilizers, he said roughly. He fled the cockpit. She stood alone in the starlight, her hand suspended in the air, reaching for a ghost she couldn't see. The news came through on the 6th day. Reese had repaired the long-range receiver. The static cleared, replaced by the crisp, jubilant voice of a Federation news anchor. Confirmed reports from the Outer Rim. The Vorm fleet has collapsed. I repeat, the Vorm fleet has collapsed. Reese turned up the volume. He stood by the console, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Sevrana sat on the edge of the pilot's chair, listening. It happened simultaneously across all sectors, the anchor continued, their voice trembling with emotion. At 0800 hours, a wave of energy was detected originating from the uncharted sectors near the Orus Veil. This energy, scientists are calling it a hyperdimensional shield pulse, passed through our ships harmlessly. But when it hit the Vorm, the effect was catastrophic. The audio switched to a clip from a frontline soldier. They just stopped. Their ships. They didn't explode them, or they just died. The organic matter in their hulls withered. The hive mind link severed. They fell out of the sky like stone. It is over. We don't know how, and we don't know who. But the war is over. The galaxy is saved, the anchor returned. Celebrations have erupted on Terra, Lysara, and the colony worlds. The High Council has declared a week of mourning for the fallen, followed by a month of victory. But the source of the shield remains a mystery. The cost of this miracle is unknown. Reese reached out and snapped the radio off. The silence that followed was deafening. "We won," Sevrana said. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, a phantom sensation of triumph that didn't feel like her own. "The Vorm is gone." "Yeah," Reese said. He stared at the black screen. "We won." "You do not sound happy." Reese turned to her. His eyes were wet, shining with a fierce, angry light. "Happy? The cost is unknown." They said, "Unknown." He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "I know the cost. I know exactly what it cost." He looked at the glowing scar on her chest. Sevrana looked down. The light in her skin was pulsing faster, harder. It didn't hurt, but it felt heavy, as if the weight of all those saved lives was resting on her sternum. "Me," she whispered. A realization, cold and sharp, pierced the fog of her amnesia. "I paid the cost." "You gave everything," Reese said, his voice cracking. "You traded yourself for them, for a galaxy that didn't believe you, for a council that mocked you." "And for you?" she asked. Reese froze. He looked at her, and the walls he had built crumbled for just a second. "Yes," he croaked. "For me." He turned away, hiding his face. "I have to chart a course. We need supplies. We are docking at Station 4 Beta. It is a scrapyard. Quiet. Get ready." That night, the dreams began. They were not narratives. They were flashes, violent, bright, and visceral. She saw a hand, rough, scarred, holding hers. She felt the mud of a jungle floor. She smelled rain and hot stone. She saw a face, Reese. But not the wrecked man who piloted this ship. A younger, fiercer Reese. He was screaming her name. She saw a kiss. It was desperate, tasting of blood and finality. "Whatever it costs," a voice whispered in her mind. "I will find a way to bring you back." She woke up gasping, her skin glowing in the dark cabin. The scar on her chest was illuminating the room like a lantern. She needed to get it out. The pressure in her head was unbearable. She found a tin of industrial grease in the engine room and a packet of crushed chalk Reese used for marking hull repairs. She mixed them on a spare metal plate, creating a thick, white paste. She began to paint on the wall of the mess hall. She didn't know how to paint, but her hands knew. They moved with frantic speed. She painted the jungle. She painted the ruins of a temple with obsidian pillars. She painted a figure made of shadows and violet light. And in the center, she painted a man. He was standing in the dark, holding a rifle, looking back at her. Reese found her there hours later. His hands were covered in engine oil. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the wall. He looked at the painting of himself. He looked at the depiction of the temple, the place where he had lost her. "You remember," he whispered, hope and terror warring in his voice. Sevrana dropped the rag she was using as a brush. She turned to him, her face smeared with white grease. "No," she said, frustration making her voice tremble. "I don't. I see pictures. Reese, I feel ghosts, but I don't know what they mean. I know I loved someone. I can feel the hole where he used to be." She stepped toward him. "Was it you? Did I love you?" Reese stood paralyzed. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to cross the room, take her in his arms, and tell her everything. But Jaltor's warning echoed in his mind. The price is memory, self, and love. If he told her, he would be forcing a narrative on a blank slate. He would be taking advantage of a woman who didn't know her own name. "It doesn't matter," Rhys said, his voice dead. "That person is gone. Sevrana, you are who you are now." "That is a lie," she shouted. She grabbed his wrist, smearing grease on his flight suit. "Stop lying to me. You look at me like I am the only thing in the world, and then you tell me it doesn't matter? Tell me the truth." "The truth is we are docking in 1 hour." Rhys yanked his arm away. "Clean yourself up." He walked out. Sevrana sank to the floor, staring at the painting of the man who looked exactly like the one who had just left her. Station 4. Beta was a rust bucket orbiting a dying gas giant. It was a graveyard for ships, a place where scavengers picked over the bones of the old war. It was the perfect place to hide. Or so Rhys thought. They docked in a lower bay, far from the main promenade. Rhys went out to barter for fuel cells and protein packs. Sevrana stayed on the ship, instructed to keep the airlock sealed. She sat in the pilot's chair, tracing the lines of the console. She felt the ship humming. It felt protective. Suddenly, the proximity alarms blared. Sevrana jumped. The radar screen lit up. 3 ships were approaching fast, not scavengers. These were sleek, military-grade interceptors. They bore the sigil of the Lissari Royal Fleet, but the sigil was defaced, painted over with jagged red lines. "Rhys!" she yelled into the comms unit. "Rhys, ships are coming." "I see them." Rhys's voice crackled over the speaker. He sounded breathless, running. "They found us. Start the pre-flight sequence. I am 2 minutes out." "Who are they?" "Kalen," Rhys shouted. "Your brother." The airlock cycled. Rhys burst onto the bridge, throwing a bag of supplies into the corner. He threw himself into the pilot's seat. "Strap in." "I thought the war was over," Sevrana cried, fumbling with the harness. "The war is over," Rhys growled, firing the engines. "But revenge never expires." The Talon detached from the docking clamp with a groan of metal. Rhys spun the ship around, facing the open bay doors. Outside, the 3 interceptors were already in attack formation. "Attention, traitor vessel," a voice boomed over the open frequency. It was distorted, metallic, and utterly insane. "Hand over the husk. The princess belongs to the new order." "Kalen," Sevrana whispered. She didn't remember him, but the name made her scar burn cold. "Hang on," Rhys said. He slammed the throttle forward. The Talon shot out of the hangar bay like a bullet. Laser fire erupted around them. The shields flared blue as bolts of plasma hammered the hull. Rhys flew like a madman, diving between the rusting hulks of derelict capital ships floating in the station's orbit. "Shields at 60%. Sevrana called out, reading the display she barely understood. "I can't outrun them," Rhys muttered. "They have upgraded engines. Vorm tech." One of the interceptors swooped down, cutting off their escape vector. It fired a grappling magnet. The beam hit the Talon, seizing the ship and jerking it to a halt. "They have got us!" Rhys yelled. "Inertial dampeners failing." The ship shuddered. The airlock light turned red. "They are boarding," Rhys said. He unbuckled his harness and grabbed the heavy blaster rifle from the rack. He tossed a smaller pistol to Sevrana. She caught it. The weight was familiar. Her finger found the trigger guard automatically. "Stay behind me," Rhys said. "Do not let them take you. If I go down, you blow the airlock. You understand?" "Rhys, do you understand?" he roared, his eyes wild. "Yes," she whispered. The airlock door hissed. Sparks flew as a plasma cutter sliced through the bolts. With a clang, the door was kicked inward. Figures in black armor stormed the bridge. They were Lissari, but wrong. Their movements were jerky, their armor fused with silver cybernetics, the remnants of Kalen's corrupted guard. Rhys opened fire. The bridge turned into a chaos of noise and light. Rhys dropped the first two attackers with precise shots to the head. He moved with brutal efficiency, using the tight space to his advantage. Sevrana fired too. She didn't think. She just reacted. She shot a soldier who was aiming at Rhys's back. The recoil jarred her arm, but the soldier fell. "Clear left," Rhys shouted, reloading, but they kept coming. More soldiers poured through the breach, and then Kalen entered. He was a nightmare. Half his face was silver metal. His arm was a claw of Vorm technology. He didn't carry a gun, he carried a sword made of unstable plasma. "Sister," Kalen hissed, "you look empty." "Get back!" Rhys stepped in front of Sevrana, raising his rifle. Kalen laughed. He moved with blinding speed. He deflected Rhys's shot with his blade and lunged. Rhys tried to dodge, but the space was too small. The plasma blade slashed across his chest, cutting through the flight suit and into the flesh beneath. Rhys grunted, a wet, guttural sound. He fell back, crashing into the console. Blood, bright red human blood, sprayed across the floor. "No!" Sevrana screamed. Rhys slumped to the floor, clutching his chest. The rifle clattered away. Kalen loomed over him, raising the sword for the killing stroke. The pilot falls. The tragedy ends. Sevrana looked at Rhys. She saw the blood pooling under him. She saw the way his hand trembled as he tried to reach for his boot knife. She saw his eyes lock onto hers, not with fear for himself, but with an apology. "I promised," his eyes said. "I promised to bring you back." Something inside Sevrana cracked. It wasn't a mental barrier. It was the dam holding back the ocean. The sight of his blood, the red reality of his pain, shattered the glass cage Zhaltor had built around her soul. The logic of the sacrifice dissolved under the weight of the instinct. Protect him. "Rhys." She didn't shoot. She threw herself across the space between them. She didn't attack Kalen. She fell onto Rhys, shielding his body with her own. Kalen paused, amused. "How poetic. You wish to die together." Sevrana didn't look at her brother. She grabbed Rhys's face. His blood was on her hands. She smeared it on his cheek. She kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of souls. She pressed her mouth to his, breathing her life into him, desperate to anchor him to the world. And in that contact, the circuit closed. The scar on her chest exploded with light. But it wasn't the cold, violet light of Zhaltor. It was gold. It was warm. It was the Lissari ancestral fire, fueled not by duty but by love. A shockwave of energy blasted outward from her body. It hit Kalen like a physical blow. He screamed as the golden light burned his cybernetics. The Vorm tech in his body short-circuited, sizzling and popping. He was thrown backward, out of the airlock, crashing into his own soldiers. The light filled the bridge, blinding and absolute. Then it receded. Sevrana pulled back from the kiss. She was gasping for air. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. The violet vacancy was gone. In its place was a storm of recognition. She looked at the man bleeding in her arms. She looked at the scar on his lip. She looked at the gray in his stubble. Every memory rushed back at once. The smell of the bar on Koro 7, the jungle of Kaidra, the mural on Naldur, the way he held her when she broke. The promise in the hangar bay. She began to cry. "I knew you," she whispered, her voice trembling with the force of the revelation. Rhys blinked, his vision swimming from blood loss. "Sevrana, I knew you," she sobbed. pressing her forehead to his. You held me when I was no one. You followed me into the void. Rhys stared at her. He saw it. He saw her. The wall was gone. The woman who had sacrificed herself had clawed her way back out of the dark because she refused to let him die alone. Tears spilled from his eyes, mixing with the blood on his face. You came back, he wheezed, a sob tearing through his chest. You're still her. No, Sevrana said fiercely. She placed her hand over his wound, her palm glowing with healing light. I am not just her. I am the one who chose you. Maybe even more. Rhys laughed, a weak, choking sound. God, I love you. Hold on, she commanded, her voice shifting into the tone of a queen. Do not dare die on me now. Commander Calder, we have a brother to depose. She stood up, the pistol in her hand. She stood over Rhys, a guardian of light and blood. Kalen was stumbling back into the bridge, smoke rising from his implants. He looked terrified. Impossible, Kalen rasped. The deal! The memories. The deal was for my soul, Sevrana said, her voice cold as deep space. She raised the gun. But my heart, that was never for sale. That belongs to him. She fired. The shot took Kalen in the shoulder, spinning him around. Get off my ship, she snarled. She hit the emergency seal on the airlock. The blast door slammed shut, severing the connection to the enemy ship. Computer, she shouted. Disengage grappling mag. Emergency thrust. The Talon lurched free. Sevrana threw herself into the pilot's seat, Rhys's seat. Her hands flew over the controls with a memory that was now fully unlocked. She punched the afterburners. The ship screamed away from the station, leaving the confused and battered remnants of Kalen's squadron behind. As they hit hyperspace, the stars stretching into infinite lines of safety, Sevrana unbuckled and ran back to Rhys. He was pale, but he was smiling. You flew, he whispered. I watched a good teacher, she said, kneeling beside him and applying a pressure bandage from the med kit. You remember, he said again, as if he couldn't believe it. Everything, she promised, kissing his blood-stained hand. I remember everything. The return to Lysara was not an invasion. It was a reckoning. The remnant fleet, a ragtag armada of mining haulers, stolen frigates, and the few loyalist destroyers that had defected after the shield activated, dropped out of hyperspace directly above the capital world. They expected fire. They expected the sky to light up with the orbital defense grid that Kalen had turned into a stranglehold around the planet. But the guns remained silent. On the bridge of the Talon, Rhys Calder watched the sensor displays with a frown. His chest was heavily bandaged beneath a fresh flight suit. The wound from the station battle a throbbing reminder of how close they had cut it. Why aren't they firing? He asked. We are in optimal range. They could vaporize us. Sevrana stood beside him. She wore no armor, no royal silk. She wore the gray flight suit of the rebellion, stained with grease and sweat. But around her shoulders, she had draped a cloak of simple white wool, the color of mourning and of rebirth. They do not fire because they know, Sevrana said quietly. She placed her hand on the console. The scar beneath her clothes pulsed, a rhythmic beat of golden light that seemed to resonate with the sensors. The shield, Rhys, it connects every Lysari soul. They can feel me. They know the true source of their salvation is on this ship. She keyed the comms. This is Sevrana of House Lysari. She spoke, her voice calm, projected across every frequency, civilian and military alike. I have returned to heal the wound in our home. Stand down. The response was immediate. The blockade ships broke formation. They didn't flee, they simply drifted aside, parting like a curtain to create a corridor leading straight to the crystal spire. Well, Reese exhaled, navigating the Talon into the opening. That is a hell of a parking pass. The capital city, Ethelgard, was changed. As they descended toward the landing platform of the High Council, Sevrana saw the scars of Kaelin's rule. The crystalline towers, once radiant with inner light, were dull and gray. Banners of black and crimson hung from the spires, emblazoned with the jagged sigil of the New Order. Patrol drones buzzed through the streets like angry insects, and the crowds that usually filled the plazas were gone, replaced by squads of cybernetically enhanced troopers. "He has turned a garden into a garrison," Sevrana whispered, her hands clenching into fists. "Fear does that," Reese said, engaging the landing gear. "It makes everything small and ugly." The Talon touched down on the Grand Plaza. The ramp lowered. Sevrana walked out first. Reese was a half step behind her, his hand resting casually near the heavy blaster on his hip. Behind them, a squad of remnant shock troopers, led by Tora, fanned out, their weapons raised. A battalion of Kaelin's shadow guard waited for them at the base of the council steps. They were faceless, helmeted, their armor fused with the silver circuitry of Vorm technology. But they did not attack. They wavered. They looked at the woman walking toward them, the woman who glowed with the same energy that had banished the monsters from their nightmares. "Move!" Sevrana commanded. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The captain of the guard hesitated, his mechanical optic zooming in on her face. Then, slowly, he lowered his rifle. He stepped aside. One by one, the soldiers followed suit. The path to the throne room opened. Sevrana began to climb the stairs. Every step was a memory. Here, she had played as a child. Here, she had been dismissed as a hysteric. Here, she would end it. The doors to the High Council chamber were sealed. Reese didn't wait for a code. He nodded to Tora. The reptile-skinned mercenary grinned and placed a breaching charge on the lock mechanism. Boom! The explosion shattered the heavy doors, sending fragments of crystal and gold skittering across the polished floor. Smoke billowed into the chamber. Sevrana stepped through the haze. The council was in session. The 12 high councilors sat in their gravity chairs, looking terrified. And on the throne, which had been raised on a dais of black metal, sat Kaelin. He was barely recognizable as Lissari. The Vorm corruption had accelerated since the battle at the station. His skin was pale, veined with silver. His left eye was entirely machine, a glowing red aperture. His arm was a pincer of dark metal. He wore robes of oil-slick fabric that seemed to writhe around him. "The ghost returns," Kaelin sneered. His voice was a grinding dissonance, two tones overlaid, one human, one digital. "I thought I killed you, sister. I thought I broke your pet human." "You tried," Reese said, stepping out of the smoke. He stood to Sevrana's right, his stance loose but ready. "You missed." Sevrana walked to the center of the room. The counselors stared at her. They looked at Kaelin, then at her, weighing their survival. "This ends now." "Kaelin," Sevrana said. Her voice echoed in the vast chamber. "The Vorm are gone. Your masters are dust. You are ruling over a graveyard of your own making." "I brought an order," Kaelin shouted, standing up. The movement was jerky, unnatural. "While you chased myths, I secured our borders. I integrated the superior technology. I made us strong." "You made us slaves," Sevrana countered. "You sold the soul of our people to a machine intelligence that wanted to consume us." "And what did you do?" Kaelin laughed, a sound like tearing metal. "You went to the void. You begged a dead god for a favor, and look at you, you are empty, a shell." He pointed his metal claw at her. She is defective. She has no memory. She is a puppet of the entity, the counselors murmured, fear rippling through them. Show them, Reese said softly. Savrana reached up and unclasped her cloak. She let it fall to the floor. She unzipped the front of her flight suit, pulling the fabric down to reveal her chest. The chamber gasped. The scar was blinding. It was a river of living starlight, pulsating with the rhythm of the galactic shield. It wasn't a mark of shame. It was a mark of divinity. It cast a golden glow that illuminated the dark corners of the room, reflecting in the terrified eyes of the council. I am not empty, Savrana declared, her voice rising. I gave my memory, I gave myself, and I clawed my way back because I remembered the one thing the Vorm could not understand. She looked at Reese, then back at her brother. Love. It is not a weakness. Kalen. It is the only power that lasts. Lies! Kalen shrieked. The red light in his eye flared. Sentimental biological waste. He snapped his fingers. Guards! Kill them! Kill the witch! The shadow guard in the room hesitated. They looked at the scar. They looked at Kalen. I said kill them! Kalen roared. He drew his plasma sword, the blade crackling with unstable, jagged energy. If you will not do it, I will do it myself. He leaped from the dais. He didn't aim for Savrana. He aimed for Reese. He knew, with the cold logic of the machine, that Reese was her anchor. To break her, he had to break him. Reese! Savrana screamed, reaching for her pistol. But Kalen was too fast. He closed the distance in a blur of motion. Reese didn't back down. He didn't try to outrun the superhuman speed. He stepped into it. As the plasma blade swung down in a decapitating arc, Reese dropped to his knees, sliding across the polished floor. The blade slashed the air inches above his head, singing the tips of his hair. Reese came up inside Kalen's guard. He drove his combat knife into the gap between Kalen's cybernetic chest plate and his organic shoulder. Sparks showered them. Kalen roared, backhanding Reese with his metal arm. The blow sent Reese flying. He smashed into a marble pillar, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He crumpled to the floor, gasping, his vision swimming. Pathetic, Kalen hissed, marching toward him. A mudcrawler fighting a god. Savrana fired 3 shots, dead center in Kalen's back. The energy bolt struck the personal shield generator built into Kalen's spine. They flared and dissipated. Kalen didn't even turn around. He raised his sword to finish Reese. Reese looked up. He saw death coming. He saw the red eye. And he saw the loose bundle of power conduits hanging from Kalen's damaged shoulder where the knife had struck. Reese didn't try to stand. He rolled. The sword slammed into the floor where Reese had been a second before, melting the stone. Reese scrambled forward, grabbing the hanging wires with his bare hand. Eat this! Reese gritted out. He yanked the wires, ripping them free from the housing, and jammed the live ends directly into the open socket of Kalen's knee joint. The circuit completed. Kalen convulsed. The feedback loop screamed through his cybernetics. The Vorm AI, panic-stricken by the surge, tried to reboot his system. Kalen froze, his body locking up in a seizure of sparks and smoke. Reese stood up. He was bleeding from the mouth. His ribs were screaming. He looked at the paralyzed tyrant. You are not a god, Reese panted, drawing his heavy blaster. You are just a glitch. He pressed the barrel of the gun against the exposed power core on Kalen's chest. He pulled the trigger. The blast was contained, muffled by Kalen's body, but the effect was absolute. The core detonated. Kalen's chest cavity collapsed inward. The light in his red eye flickered once, twice, and went dark. The tyrant fell backward. He hit the floor with the heavy, hollow sound of scrap metal. Silence filled the room. Reese stood over the body for a moment, swaying slightly. Then he holstered his weapon and looked at Savrana. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough. Savrana ran to him. She didn't care about the council. She didn't care about the protocol. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his neck. "You idiot," she sobbed. "You reckless, wonderful idiot." "I told you," Reese wheezed, wincing as she squeezed his ribs. "I don't lose passengers." The High Council recovered their composure quickly. Politicians always do. As Kalen's body was dragged away by the silent guards, Councillor Varen, the same man who had dismissed Savrana months ago, stepped down from his podium. He smoothed his robes, a look of practiced benevolence plastered on his face. "Princess Savrana," Varen said, bowing low. "You have saved us. You have purged the corruption. The council is unanimous. We recognize your claim. We are ready to crown you Empress of the Lissari Dominion. The throne is yours." He gestured to the black metal seat on the dais. Savrana pulled away from Reese. She wiped the tears from her face. She looked at the throne. Then she looked at Varen. "Empress," she repeated. "Of course," Varen smiled. "We must restore order. The galaxy needs strong Lissari leadership to rebuild." Savrana walked up the steps of the dais. She stood in front of the throne. She ran her hand along the armrest. "My brother sat here," she said softly. "And before him, my father, and his father. They all believed that Lissara was the center of the universe, that our light gave us the right to rule the dark." She turned to face them. Her eyes were violet fire. The scar on her chest glowed so brightly it was hard to look at her directly. "That belief is what brought the Vorm," she said. "Arrogance, isolation. We thought we were gods, so we invited devils to dinner." She drew her pistol. Varen gasped. "Princess!" Savrana fired. She didn't shoot Varen. She shot the throne. She fired again and again, the plasma bolts melting the black metal, slagging the controls, turning the symbol of absolute power into a smoking ruin. She holstered the gun. "There will be no Empress," Savrana declared. Her voice rang with the authority of someone who had stared into the eyes of eternity and unblinkingly made a deal. "The Lissari Dominion is finished." "But chaos," Varen sputtered. "Who will rule?" "We will not rule," Savrana said. "We will serve. I am calling for a dissolution of the borders. We will form a council of races, humans, Lissari, reptiloids, even the independent artificial intelligences of the Rim. Everyone gets a seat. Everyone gets a voice." "That is impossible," Varen sneered. "The lower races are chaotic. They need guidance." "They saved us," Savrana snapped. She pointed to Reese. "A human smuggler did more for this galaxy in 1 month than this council has done in a century. A rebel mercenary fleet held the line while you hid in your towers." She walked down the steps, standing beside Reese again. She took his hand, interlacing their fingers in plain view of the entire court. "We are done being superior," Savrana said. "From now on, we are just neighbors. If you cannot accept that, Counselor, then you can resign. I am sure there are plenty of people in the lower city who would love your chair." Varen looked at the smoking throne, then at the soldiers who were now looking to Savrana with awe. He swallowed his pride. He bowed. "As you command, Citizen Savrana." "Good," Savrana said. She looked at Reese. "Let's get out of here. I need fresh air." The gardens of the Summer Palace had been neglected, but they were still beautiful. The bioluminescent flora of Lissara was resilient. It grew over the statues and the fountains, reclaiming the stone with wild loops of glowing vines. It was late. The twin moons hung low in the sky, bathing the terrace in silver light. The sounds of the city celebrating below drifted up, music, shouting, the crackle of fireworks. Sevrana stood by the railing, looking out over the Capitol. She had changed out of her flight suit into a simple gown of white silk, loose and flowing. Her hair was down, a silver cascade down her back. Rhys came up behind her. He had cleaned up, though he still moved with a stiff, careful gait. He held 2 glasses of wine. "I stole this from Varen's private cellar," Rhys said, handing her a glass. "Figured he owed us." Sevrana smiled, taking the glass. "He owes us a lot more than wine." They stood in silence for a long time, drinking the wine, watching the lights of the new world they had made. "It is strange," Sevrana said softly. "I feel light. For the first time in my life, I do not feel the weight of the prophecy or the crown. But I also feel sad," Rhys offered. "Yes." She touched the scar on her chest. "I mourn the girl who went into that temple. She was so brave, and she is gone. I have her memories, but I am not her. I am a mosaic of what she was and what came after." Rhys set his glass down on the railing. He turned her toward him. He ran his hands down her arms, resting them on her waist. "You are better than her," Rhys said fiercely. "She was a symbol. You are a woman. You are the person who came back for me. That is the only person I care about." Sevrana looked up at him. The moonlight caught the gray in his eyes, the lines of fatigue around his mouth. He looked older than when they met, weathered by the war they had fought in the shadows. But he was beautiful to her. He was the most real thing in the universe. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. "I saw everything, Rhys," she whispered. "When the memories came back, I saw the tests in the labyrinth. I saw you walk through ghosts for me. I saw you beg Jaltor to take you instead." "I meant it," Rhys said. "I would do it again." "I know," she said. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of grief. "I gave my soul once, Rhys. I gave it to the void to save 1 billion strangers. And I would give it again if I had to." She leaned in close, her forehead resting against his chin. "But this time," she whispered, her voice trembling with the intensity of her choice. "This time, I choose you first, before the galaxy, before the duty, before everything." Rhys let out a ragged breath. He pulled her tighter, his hands tangling in her hair. "That is good," he murmured against her lips. "Because I am never letting you go again. You are stuck with me, princess. No more voids, no more gods, just us." "Just us," she agreed. She kissed him. It was slow, deliberate, and full of promise. It was a kiss that sealed the past and opened the door to the future. Under the twin moons, surrounded by the ruins of the old empire and the seeds of the new one, they held each other, 2 broken things that had fit together to make something whole. The dawn on Lysara was spectacular. The suns rose in a wash of gold and violet, chasing the shadows from the streets of Ethelgard. The city was already awake. The people were gathering in the great plaza, humans and Lysari standing shoulder to shoulder. The throne was gone. In its place, a round table had been set up in the center of the square. Sevrana walked out of the palace gates. She did not walk alone. Rhys was by her side. He wasn't walking 2 steps behind like a bodyguard. He was walking hand in hand with her, his fingers laced with hers. The crowd cheered. It wasn't the polite, terrified applause of the old regime. It was a roar of genuine joy. They threw flowers, glowing orchids from the jungle moons, desert roses from the human colonies. Sevrana waved. She looked at Rhys. He was smiling, actually smiling, his cynicism washed away by the morning light. They reached the round table. Representatives from the other races were already there. Tora the mercenary, a delegate from the Terran Federation, a hive mind speaker for the sentient machines. Sevrana took her seat. Reese took the seat next to her. "Shall we begin?" Sevrana asked. "Let's build a world," Reese said. Epilogue. 50 years later, the great plaza of Ethelgard had become a place of pilgrimage, not for a religion but for history. In the center of the plaza, where the statue of the first emperor once stood, there was now a mural. It was not made of stone or paint. It was made of living light weave, shifting and moving with the time of day. It depicted a scene of terrifying beauty. A vast, dark entity loomed in the background, Jal Tor. In the foreground, a woman made of golden light stood with her arms wide, a scar glowing on her chest like a star. She was offering herself to the dark, her face serene and determined, but there was a detail that the artists had insisted on adding. A shadow stood behind the woman, a man, battered and scarred, holding onto her waist, tethering her to the earth, refusing to let her drift away. Tourists from 100 worlds came to see it. They brought their children. They pointed to the woman. "That is Sevrana the Savior," they would say. "She stopped the Vorm." Then they would point to the man. "And that is Commander Calder. He saved her." Below the mural, carved into a slab of simple obsidian rock, was an inscription in 3 languages. It did not list her titles. It did not list her battles. It read simply, "She saved the galaxy, but kept her heart."